And you guys know who the hell I am? Anybody? Any? Good. I was kind of hoping you didn't, but.
I had been feeling a bit of an outsider for a little bit of time, you know? So it wasn't any shocker that big conversation came about. It's as simple as this. I mean, Jeff all but said, "I want my band back." May as well have said those words. He didn't. So, you know, I'm not putting words in Jeff's mouth. I'm not going to do that. He did not say, "I want my band back." But essentially he did. And he had every right in the world to say that, you know? I think the hyperbolic way that he said it was, I think a circle can only have one center. You know, well, what does that mean?
We've got one thing in common. We both love you. And maybe someday it'll be true.
I think Jay was the kind of person who jumps into the deep end of the pool and swims for survival. I think that's how he learned a lot of things. He sort of jumped into them and felt his way very, very intuitively.
Some people play music for the drugs and the chicks and for all their friends to think they're cool. Everybody already knew Jay Bennett was cool.
You know, he was a normal dude that just happened to be an insanely gifted musician.
Here's a guy who lives music. He is the song. He becomes the part.
Like a photograph, you never quite tell the truth.
Because he and his brother Jeff were so close in age, they were constant playmates, even starting from the point when we would put one in the crib with the other one to play, and that's when they began their hat collection. They had hats that represented any kind of male role. So they were sailors, they were soldiers, they were astronauts, then they were explorers. I think probably all in total they had about 50 hats. Jay was probably less than a year old when that started. So from then on, that generated a lot of their imaginary play.
Sewing with Miss Bennett.
All right, you got this going?
Yeah.
Okay. Step one, thread onto that thing, around that little guy, and then just push down on the gas pedal, unwind your bobbin, push it back over, push this little guy back out, thread the needle, go through that little thing with the foot, pull it back that way, close that. This is kind of set about right, that's set about right. This is straight and zigzag. And then clamp down on something, there's the foot lifter.
Besides the hats being some kind of a security thing, at some point in his preschool years, he got a button down the front, button collar, long sleeve red shirt, sort of a dusty red shirt, and wore it every day. And it fell apart to the point where he didn't wear it to bed anymore, but he would put it on in the morning and it was just a vest. Except that the cuffs were still there. The sleeves weren't there. And I remember seeing him reaching down and putting the cuffs on, which no longer had buttons. They had safety pins, you know. So he would put this vest on and put the cuffs on. Jay was a very good baseball player, and he wound up being a pitcher. And he was usually in the World Series, you know, in the winning team. Oh, this is some of his artwork way back when. The neat thing about this cartoon character that he would draw repeatedly is he would put his pen or something down here and never pick it up. And he would start at the bottom, and then he would draw this cartoon character. One year he did Christmas cards.
How old was he at that point?
Maybe about 8th grade. I tried to get him to take some art courses, and he said he didn't need to. If somebody's doorbell rang, he would tell you what the key was. If somebody's cell phone rang, he would tell you that. His brother had like 6 months of piano lessons, and I probably had about 6 months of piano lessons, but we played, I would say, mathematically, and Jay played intuitively. The first guitar that he ever owned was an acoustic guitar, which we purchased when he was in 8th grade. He had the choice of going on the 8th grade trip to Washington, D.C., or buying the guitar, and he chose to buy the guitar.
My parents arranged for him to take lessons from a guy named Larry Petrillo, who actually happened to be a teacher who worked at the school where my father was principal.
He thought Jay had some real talent, and I didn't believe him.
And my memory is that Larry came over to the house no more than 4 or 5 times, and after that told my parents there was nothing left that he could teach Jay. He
had a band, Wet Pavement, and then Rebel Ducks, and the Robesmen. I love the Robesmen story because I think there were 3 or 4 of them. They had rented some recording equipment. They got a good deal on it if they could rent it from 10 o'clock at night to 5 in the morning. So they set it all up downstairs in our basement, which at the time was a new basement and wasn't heated or air conditioned or anything. At some point around 1 or 2 in the morning, they got cold. So they came upstairs and got everybody's bathrobes out of the bedrooms and went back downstairs, continued their recording.
And recorded what was some pretty interesting music, about half original, half covers, as I recall, and put it on a tape at the time and called it The Robesmen. It was just, you know, a bunch of guys with the love of music staying up all night doing something crazy. I don't think it was, you know, it didn't get him a record deal or anything like that.
He went to college, came home, I think, for Christmas break. And there was a wall between the kitchen and the living room, and I heard his brother Jeff playing the piano. I remember saying from the kitchen, "Gee, Jeff, you must have learned a new song while you were at college." And Jay responded and said, "It's not Jeff playing the piano, Mom, it's me." He said, "I figured out the piano's just like the guitar."
There was a period in the 70s and our early teen years where, like most kids, he rediscovered the classics, the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Neil Young, who remained a favorite for a long, long time. But I think I noticed a change in the late 70s in the punk rock new wave movement where Jay really saw something different. I remember, you know, the first time that we would listen to The Clash, the Talking Heads, Squeeze, Jam, and just standing in his room listening to the record player over and over on some of those tracks. I was just enjoying the music. He was figuring out how to play the guitar solo, but something clicked in him in that era. And it's interesting that musically he never replicated that exactly, but I think you see elements in all of that, you know, what he did. It was the right sort of music at the right time when he was really just beginning to mature as a musician himself.
This thing sounds good.
I knew Jay like 1987, 1989-ish, in that era. And that was like the height of the local rock scene at the time, and there was a lot going on. And I worked for the radio station at University of Illinois, WPGU, as a DJ. But my main interaction was him because I'm a singer, so he wanted to do a little duet group Well, there was this open mic night at this place called the Alley Cat. We went every single Monday, so we worked up a set.
Don't call me baby, you throw that word around too easily. You can't pin a name on me.
So my roommate was supposed to get luggage from her mother for her birthday, and they sent this camera. The three of us were good friends. We hung out a lot, and he'd be over at our apartment. So we just wound up running around campus with this camera, just being like goofballs.
Or does I, being also known as me, here, being alone.
The first song we did, we were at our apartment, and we realized that in the song they mentioned a fire escape. So we're like, let's go out and do it on a fire escape. This will be great.
On the stairs I smoke a cigarette alone. Mexican kids are shooting fireworks below. And hey, baby, it's the 4th of July.
Tell me about the first time you met Jay.
Probably the first time I saw him was on stage with Titanic Love Affair.
I was an editor and reporter at the Daily Illini, the local college newspaper, and was interested in the rock bands that were playing on campus. I heard about this group, Titanic Love Affair, saw them a couple of times at local bars in Champaign, and just was blown away by how great this band was. In particular, this guitar player, Jay Bennett, who was kind of wild on stage at that point.
Titanic Love Affair was on Charisma, which was a subsidiary of a major label. They had a fancy video for their first record. That was in '91. When they left the label, the band was still together. Jay wanted to make another record. And Jay had a really cool idea where I think generally when a record is made, the artist, if they pick a studio, they'll want sort of the sonic imprint of the studio on the record in terms of the sound of it, like say the sound of this room. Like an entire album will be done in this room. There'll be a certain stamp that comes from all being recorded in the same place. So on that record, Jay had a pretty cool idea where he was like, he wanted to cut not just songs, but instruments for all the songs in many, many, many different places so that there would be no identifiable acoustical fingerprint to the record. It would just sound like something that was made everywhere. And it's something that rarely gets done. I thought it was a great idea.
For a long time, this was his favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are. His third grade class went to the library once a week, and I finally got a notice from his third grade teacher that she was hoping that I would encourage Jay to check out a different book because each week he would renew it. I also sort of always wondered if the drawings in the book of the monsters and stuff had any application to the TLA album. Especially this kind of picture. There's sort of like two covers. One is the four of them, and one of them is the four of them as the monsters.
And at some point, after Titanic Love Affair imploded, Jay got noticed by Jeff Tweedy.
We had finished the first Wilco record in Memphis, and we were in St. Louis, and Jeff said there's this guitarist in a band that might be a perfect fit. He was in this band called Titanic Love Affair, and I'd heard of that band, but I wouldn't say a fan. But we went and saw him play, and he was playing with the band, Steve Pride and the Ken. Afterwards, we all sort of hung out, and I hear this voice come out of him, and I'm like, that's a pretty deep, low baritone voice. And he's talking for a while, and I thought, when's this guy gonna drop the charade and talk in his normal voice? But of course he did, and that was his voice. You know, just this rich, deep baritone. It was Jay, and very disarming and kind, and standing there drinking Bud Light like he always did.
Bringing Jay Bennett into the band, Jay had nothing to do with AM. Jay Bennett became a touring guitarist basically after AM was released and playing those songs. basically as the hired gun guitar player.
And obviously it turned into much more than that, again, once they saw his talent and the contribution he could make.
But then one time I remember we're at some club and they had an old out-of-tune piano and we're backstage. This is on, I think, the end of the first Wilco tour. And Jay just sits down and starts playing and we're like, man, you never told us you played piano or keys. What are you doing? So then on the Being There record, Jay's all over the Hammond and that starts to come out and he plays piano, but his Hammond playing was amazing.
And Jay was kind of like, well, I can play pretty much anything you throw at me, you know? There's this multi-instrumentalist kind of guy. And it was a revelation to them that, hey, this guy's got a little bit more going on than just, you know, the hired gun guitar player.
So we have this guy who can play like Don Rich from Buck Owens' band on Telecaster. He can obviously do the Pete Townsend thing with the SG. I mean, he was all about the guitar and tone. And then you had where he played Hammond, he sounded like a 63-year-old black man from Brooklyn, you know, playing a Hammond. And when he jumped on the drums, he was terrible, but in the best way possible. Like some of my favorite drummers are drummers that can't play and they barely make that fill around and then they'll land. And he had that, like, everything mattered and I'm gonna give you everything playing the drums because this is what I have.
And he also had, you know, a songwriting sensibility that Jeff encouraged. He was like, oh, what else he got?
But as time went on, he and Jeff started writing more and more together. And you know, he was Jeff's catalyst to a world that Jeff didn't really live in. And I think it opened up a lot of avenues. I think that was obvious.
It seemed to me that Tweedy is this incredible artist who plays amazingly well when he has a strong opposition of some sort.
So all of a sudden, Bennett started filtering into the lineup, and I think Jeff was already on this path. He knew that Being There had to step up from where AM was. He knew that there was that rivalry there with Uncle Tupelo and Sun Volt, in the eyes of many people, including some of the members of Wilco, as they told me, clearly won round one.
I thought both made excellent albums, but I was more of a Sun Volt person.
Sky cracks open, walls falling through the floor, just as well to keep.
When Jay Bennett started having a prominent role in Wilco, like, I didn't know who Jay Bennett was at the time, but something made me start listening to Wilco more and really digging Wilco. And then I was like, well, wait, why am I finding myself drifting over here? And I started looking at it, and I was like, oh, there's this dude, and he's playing a bunch of stuff and helping write a bunch of stuff and arranging a bunch of stuff.
It's real country music. I don't buy the whole, it's country music with a rock edge business. Do you? I think it's just real country music. People aren't used to hearing that. Does that make sense?
I know from working with Jay in the studio, he has a way of bringing out particular things and exploring musical ideas that helps, you know, sort of inspire creativity and thinking, oh, well, here's another direction that we could take this.
Being There was just winging it. Those are all rough mixes, you know? I mean, there hasn't been a conscious effort to make, there's been a conscious effort to make good music.
You know, I mean, on that album, there's two different versions of... Out of Mind, Out of Sight. Yes, right. And, you know, that being an example where if the song is good, you can take it in one direction, you can take it in another direction, and it's still going to be great. And, you know, when you would see them live during that period, they would be pretty fast and loose, and, you know, sometimes they might do a punk rock version of a song that wasn't that way on the record.
Should have been the driver, could have been the one. Should have been the driver, I could have been the one. I should have been your lover.
In the salad days when we were in vans and we'd stop, Jeff would want to stop at McDonald's. And Jay would always get triple orders of French fries. He'd be sitting in the back of the van and he would get 92 ketchups.
Jay Bennett ate a lot of ketchup, like way more ketchup than you could imagine. Arguably more ketchup than food. Jay Bennett would put almost an entire packet on each bite of fries. Who uses that much ketchup?
Our first tour to Europe, and Jay orders pommes frites, because, you know, there's meat everywhere. I think we're in Germany. Pommes frites, all these fries come out, and he goes up to get his 92 ketchups, and they charge him, and he's shelling out doubloons or whatever, buying all this. I was like, man, you spent $20 on ketchup? Yeah, I thought that was funny. He loved these Toyota Corollas.
The Toyota Corolla two-door sedan, probably the most sensible car in the world.
He and his dad, I think they had 4 of them, and they would always tinker with these cars.
Here's Jay working on one of his cars with his dad, and you'll notice he has to have the hat on.
And it's a summer. We're in his Corolla brown station wagon, and the thing just bites it. You know, it's a... So Jay's in the front, and it's me, John, and Jeff pushing this car down the street. Just like, it's the funniest scene when I think back on it. Just like, okay, keep pushing. People honking. Oh, you losers, look at these guys. They're going nowhere. That's up here where we were on the road a lot. The most we ever went out, I think, was 300 days. We would record in different cities while we were on the road. We did some stuff in Austin, Portland, Oregon. We did stuff in Nashville, Chicago. You know, it was a live band and it was a studio band. And being there to me was the first time that it sounded like that band went into the studio. That's a hard thing to replicate.
Being there tour was more like reckless abandon. At least with Summerteeth, we had some direction, but when we cut loose to party, boy, did we.
We used to do this thing called the Sea of Cups. When we played a lot of festivals, Jay would be a few Bud Lights in, and he would grab a golf cart. And we'd just parade through these cups flying everywhere, him going too fast, security people screaming at us. And I was convinced he was gonna flip it and we were gonna die, but I was like, well, if I'm going, this is how I'm going. Jay was fun. There's no doubt about that.
Europe, the final countdown. You have that one?
Oh, okay. How about the yes one? That long distance reach around.
But again, same time, musically, those were some of the best Wilco shows ever. And on a few songs, Jay would start on piano and had his guitar slung around his back and then just end the song with a blistering solo. And you never knew what to expect. Again, even as basically the closest guy to the fire, I was amazed. Again, I'm like, did he just do that? Not only his chicken picking lead playing was constantly getting better, or he was holding back on us and none of us knew his true ability, but every night, and I'm talking everybody in the band, they would do stuff where you're like, oh, you can do that too? And that was the crew. So it was a magic combination too. It was combustible at times, but there was a chemistry to that era of Wilco. And people used to tell us this all the time too. It's like, you take away one member and it's not the same.
I was in this other band and we made a record called Mermaid Avenue, and I was doing some background vocals and Billy went out for a cup of tea, mate. And I was in the booth doing the background vocals, and as soon as Billy would walk out, I'd do the background vocals in Billy's voice, and he'd walk back in and everybody would be cracking up, and just everybody would just go silent, and Billy's like, what's going on, and then he'd leave the room and we'd do it again. And I, of course, fought for those background vocals to stay on the record, but I went ahead and sang them in my own voice for better or worse.
This was around 1995, 1994. I first discovered that there were about 3,000 lyrics of my father's that had never been heard. And as I was reading through them, I thought, boy, some of them are more appropriate now than they were then. One of the lyrics that I have of my dad was actually a piece of artwork, and he often combined lyrics and artwork together. And there was this one picture of a kind of a woman, and it said, "You woke up my neighborhood." And when I was thinking of who to work with. I'm not sure if somebody mentioned Billy or I heard Billy on the radio, and I saw on his CD that he had a song called You Woke Up My Neighborhood.
You woke up my neighborhood. Night after night we would row.
He had been down at the Smithsonian Folkways, and he saw this line that Woody had written, and he loved it. So he took the line and he wrote a song called it. Then I started listening to him a lot, and I loved his immediacy.
I'm the milkman of human kindness, so leave an extra pint.
Basically, my sense of it was that it needed one group of musicians. Nora Guthrie had a long list of people that she thought would be suitable, but I was really concerned that it would sound like a tribute album. You know, if a different person sang every song, I felt it needed a core, a bit like the Basement Tapes, so that you've got a bunch of guys playing the songs. And Being There had just come out. It was clear from that Wilco could play all sorts of different styles.
I remember how excited Jay was about being able to go into the Woody Guthrie archives.
He called and he said, "Mom, I was holding a cocktail napkin in my hand, and Woody had written some potential lyrics on the cocktail napkin. He had left it in this facility or venue or whatever. Pete Seeger found it, and Pete had written on the cocktail napkin, Woody, you left this behind. I think you might want it." And Jay said, "I was holding a napkin that Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger had held." He said, "I felt like I was holding a piece of history in my hands."
Every night I just like sit there in the kitchen with a little recorder like that and throw out ideas and like looking at the lyrics and his little drawings and his handwriting and little PSs that he wrote at the end of things like California Stars, man. At the end of that, he just wrote, "This song doesn't have too many lyrics, so sing it twice." And we did, you know, we obeyed his little instructions.
The real beginning of my relationship with Jay was in Chicago, when we came ostensibly to demo. And it was clear from sitting down, when we sort of played each other the songs, it became clear to me that Jay was actually the point man on this.
Jay has a scholar air to him, that he knew so much about instruments, and that he came with a room full of instruments, just trying all these different things. They didn't always work, and he's not that, let's do this. He's the musical undercurrent in a very tough spot of trying to make these two singers, these two voices, these two instruments connect.
Well, because Mermaid Avenue was a collaboration with Billy Bragg, and there were tensions there too between those two camps.
There were some ego battles. Put two bands together like that, isn't there going to be some ego battle somewhere? I would think so.
You know, but I mean, it was definitely a situation where, you know, they came in and they performed wonderfully, and those were all supposed to be demos. And they went to Ireland to actually, is where they went, I guess, to do the real recording. Wilco was like, we're not going to redo those songs. They're just done. And I'm sure Billy Bragg supposedly was like, no, we're going to re-record them. And there was a tension. And then it was like, no, those are done. Those sound great.
Jay somehow sonically was able to thread them all together, you know, and then pull the strings a little bit tighter so that it would kind of come into a tapestry.
Maybe if I hadn't seen so much hard feelings.
You got to understand, you know, Mermaid Avenue was a bit like going every day to the dressing up box with these songs. You know, you could be whoever you wanted to be. One day we could be, you know, sort of Bob Dylan the band. The next day we could be the Byrds. The next day we could be, you know, Tom Waits. It was just such fun. So everybody was encouraged to do a little bit like that. I mean, I remember Jeff playing harmonica over one song, and I said to Jay, well, that's pretty good. How long have you been doing that? And Jay said, about a week. You know, it's great. Everybody had that. It was that sort of atmosphere. You could throw anything at these songs, you know?
And I know in particular for him, it was a very emotional experience to write the song California Stars. That really, he really felt, you know, that he was channeling Woody Guthrie to to write what Woody wanted, which made him work even harder to make that song perfect.
At the core, you have the beautiful Woody Guthrie lyrics, but then you have this arrangement that it's so deceptively simple. And it, you know, it's perfect. I mean, I think Jay once told me that an element that Jeff brought to it, which I think is key and kind of important, is the pause. On a bed of California stars, you know, that little pause moment may not seem like much, but it's pretty key to the feel of that song.
I mean, what's so great about California Stars is there's really nothing there. There's 3 chords and they just repeat, you know? I mean, it's such a great song. Everybody loves that song. You've got to remember that I went to the archive and chose my songs. Jay and Jeff went together to the archive and chose their songs. But it has such resonance with people for a simple song with pretty, you know, nice, sweet enough lyrics. It's not This Land Is Your Land, is it?
Billy Bragg came up to us in Arlington Heights after an outdoor concert. He said, when we were in the archives with Nora, and Jay chose that song, he said, I just told him basically that was stupid. That was, don't waste one of your choices on that song. And he said, I have to admit I was wrong.
Yeah, put Jay in a white coat, and he's just reaching for sound. You kind of get the feeling like that's the love of his life, is sounds.
Let's punch in the same thing we've been punching in all the keyboard tracks. I wrote this for Billy, so try to picture Billy singing it. And the fireworks don't shed light on your face. And I know you can't believe that this is something much too good to replace. But if it's so wrong, why is every ending just a brand new start? Pull over now, fold up the map to your heart.
This is, I guess you'd call it a paperweight that his dad and I made for him. These actually were his baby teeth, which we embedded in this acrylic case to make a paperweight. Did you know how Summerteeth got its name?
I did not, no.
Okay. Well, it was the summer that both Jeff Tweedy and Jay were having tooth problems. And every once in a while, when they were at a concert, they would ask if there was a dentist in the audience. And so that was the summer of teeth, but they called it Summerteeth.
Your new album, it's called Summerteeth, and that's a title that at least we Norwegians don't understand at all. Can you?
It's a title we don't understand at all either.
There's no hidden English.
Not everything has to be understood, is what we're learning with this record.
There was something in the air when we did Summerteeth. I know a lot of people will never understand it.
Well, one would be hard-pressed to find a Wilco record that had more Jay Bennett involvement than Summerteeth.
Yeah, I mean, he's all over it. I mean, it's like the Jay Jeff album.
It really is a one-of-a-kind record in the Wilco canon. I don't think anything else quite sounds like it. And it was really a Jeff and Jay record.
It's like Jay's epitome of what he does. You know, the arrangements, the I don't know, making the songs glow, I guess.
And I think with Summerteeth, I kind of, you know, feel that maybe he was feeling more comfortable around Jeff and more like Jeff was giving him more free rein to do things. So I think that was his kind of record to kind of really just take control and do what he wanted to do.
He's playing all kinds of instruments at this point, and of course, he's doing the engineering, figuring out how they're going to get particular sounds to tape. He ended up, I think, doing a lot of the mixing on it as well.
They gave him the keys to the car and then later revoked the keys, but while it was happening, it was magic.
Jay played 90% of the guitars and the keys. He played drums on one song. I think he played bass on 3. And then I played timpani on 1 that he played drums on. But I think we all wanted to make that record.
He is in that kitchen sink mode where, on any given song, let's throw as many textures and sounds and such at it as we can.
Specifically, what we did, was just layers and layers of pianos and mellotron. We actually had a real mellotron brought in. We had 2 of them at one time. I think one was brought in from the BBC and still had the Doctor Who stuff on it. And I don't know if Jay was behind that one, but I think he bought another mellotron that was out in LA and had all the string patches, and these were the authentic real deals, and that's on the record.
I have a list, probably 20 keyboards, 6 drum kits, 20 guitar amps, 2 or 3 Hammond organs. I filled a truck and drove it down to White Cliff, Willie Nelson's studio outside of Austin, Texas. And that's where we did Summerteeth.
None of us wanted to make the same record twice.
I think when I reviewed the record, I compared it to sort of like a Brian Eno type of approach to record making, completely outside of the realm of country music.
So we wanted to make a pop record. We really did.
I mean, what are we going to pretend that we didn't grow up in the 70s listening to good pop music? It's ridiculous. I mean, just because we all happen to like good old country music, that's great music too. I mean, I think we don't really make any, we don't make those divisions that those people make. So we didn't feel like we were leaving anything behind, There's never been, we never said, no more twangy guitars, or, no more songs in 6/8 or whatever,
Ready, here we go.
And again, we're out on the road forever, and we're listening to stuff in the van. At that point, I think we were in the bus, and, we're getting inspired by stuff. We're listening to Skip Spence's masterpiece, Or. All that kind of real music. We'd get inspired by stuff and just listen to stuff. We were listening to Beach Boys' Smile a lot, too.
The critics talked about that as being equivalent to what was the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, just really kind of experimenting in the studio, and there certainly was quite a bit of that.
It's just that it was a culmination of so many tracks. Once they're all blended together, there's just the spots where it's just kind of like there's 8 or 9 different instruments going on, and they just create one instrument. And so that's kind of what it is on a lot of those things. There's so many layers of instruments going on, and vocals and masked vocals and things that are you can't quite tell what they are, but they kind of create kind of a backdrop.
I'm not afraid to make musical references because to some extent my musical references are archaic. And I think personally that the bands, songwriters, whatever, have been making musical references for years and years, and generationally, I'm making a musical reference there to like 1978. That's a long ass time ago. As every generation goes on, there's more and more musical history to get caught up on.
Over time, and especially by the recording of Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, did it start wearing on other band members? Of course it did, because Jay took the reins and we were recording Mellotron overdubs at 4 a.m, and the band would come back in and be like, really 18 new tracks of cello on that song or whatever it was.
It was Jay and Jeff doing whatever they did to stay up, and they would stay up till 2, 3, and 4 working on this stuff. And John and I were feeling kind of left out, to be honest, because Jay could jump around on anything, And so, you kind of start feeling like, where's my ground? What's my, how do I belong in this, whatever. But yeah, it did start to feel more like the Jeff and Jay project. I remember John and I having a conversation about that, so.
It wasn't a band anymore. You got the sense that these two guys had sort of closed off the other guys in the band, and in doing the book, that became even more underlined.
No one said stop. So when it comes out later, oh, he overdid it, well, he's an artist. That was his art. In my opinion, he didn't overdo it. He was living it.
It has elements of everything we've done in the past, and it has some new elements. And I don't completely understand it yet. I haven't gotten away from it enough to understand what it is. To me, that record is a big chunk of my life. It is really hard for me to say what it is as a consumer mind. Like, this record is, to me, it's a year of my life.
Yankee Hotel Foxtrot took almost this, using the studio as an instrument to the nth degree. There's like two very different versions of that record, for example, that are out there.
If anyone asks me, I'm not for the remix. I thought the original one had elements of the remix, but still kept the soul of who the band was.
Oh, distance has no way of making love understandable.
I remember coming in on the early demos for that record, hearing some of that stuff, and what the record ended up sounding like. This stuff had gone through permutation after permutation.
We ultimately recorded Yankee Hotel Foxtrot 3 times.
I need a camera to my eye, reminding which lies that I've been hiding, which echoes belong. I need a camera to my eye, deciding which lies have I been hiding, which echoes belong.
You're making music. We have this. There's lots of songs written. You're melding two songs together. You're rewriting songs. You're doing 7 completely different takes of one song. And you're doing everything. You're writing songs up until the day you're supposed to be done, and retracking and rewriting, and you're doing what you do. It's fun. We don't need anybody else. Somehow we're kind of living on that level, this dream. Like, that's what you dream of when you're first starting out. Like, I wish we had this giant space with all our gear and our own studio and all the time in the world.
A lot of the stories I would hear about kind of those loft days was obviously immense talent, but, egos or, whatever you want to call it. And definitely, like, when we were working with Jay those days, his big rule was check your ego at the door. So I think to some degree, he was tiptoeing around people to try to make great music.
Jeff had a sound in his head for that record that Jay, I think, was not always in agreement with. And you started to see the two of them starting to split.
Yeah, Jeff's lyrics, but behind the scenes, the avant-garde, the reckless, careless, that was all Jay Bennett.
See, Jeff was much more interested in the album as a collection of songs that work together, whereas Jay was all about, he had that power pop thing going on. Like, I want a 3-minute single.
Jay was the one who did all the heavy lifting on the recording. He recorded it all, and he was arranging half the songs. He's writing a bunch of the songs.
That's when I really started seeing his mad scientist side, which was beautiful. He'd be down on the ground, rewiring something, everything was kind of, hodgepodge together, which is why ultimately I brought in Chris Brickley. He knew, technically to not distort or hit tape too hard. He knew the gear, but Jay's finesse in the studio is what made that record special.
It's a record that means a lot to a lot of people. I'm glad I'm part of it. It's not my favorite one. And maybe because I know what was going on history-wise, because I was there. And it was a bad time for several members of that band.
Jeff tried to make Wilco the Jeff Tweedy solo band. I tried to make Wilco my band. I obviously was up against greater odds. A lot easier for him to take over the band than for me. That's it. Jeff wanted more control. I had very naturally gotten more, more prominence, more control, more decision-making authority, more input on the music, very, very gradually. And at some point that, had to plateau. If it went beyond that, then it wouldn't be Jeff's band anymore. Right. And while it was Wilco, it was still Jeff's band. And he needed to kind of tighten the reins.
So, and then two things happened. Glenn Cochi came into the band, Ken Coomer left.
I was told to help move Ken out of the loft. That was like the first domino of hey, we're replacing Ken Coomer. Again, a lot of us were like, you're what?
Well, I was there for some of it. I was there we recorded the whole record. And then Jay was working on that, doing mixing and stuff.
So yeah, and it started getting competitive and a little weird.
And then Jeff started collaborating very closely with Jim O'Rourke, essentially usurping the role that Jay played on, say, Summerteeth.
Jay was hurt when Jim O'Rourke was brought in to mix the record. Jay took that personally.
But, I speculate that there was a distance growing because I was fucking wearing 7 different hats during the making of that record. It hampered the communication in the band because people didn't know if they were talking to Jay Bennett, the engineer, the producer, the musician, the songwriter. Ultimately, did it affect the record poorly? No.
They needed a fresh set of ears, as Jeff said, to figure out what this record was. And Jim O'Rourke was the guy. And he and Jeff ended up working very closely near the end of that record. And I think Jay kind of felt shoved to the side.
That's just how making music is. There's a lot of people with a lot of ideas. At some point, one person's ideas are going to take precedence.
I engineered the record. O'Rourke was not there one single day while we were recording the record. What's funny, even all the weird stuff, it was already there. All the backwards pianos and noise and crap, it's already there. He just mixed it. And in fact, there were times when he kind of straightened it out, where he kind of de-weirdified it.
We had a hell of a record going. When the film crew moved in, everything changed.
It was about 3 a.m. We were either going to get something great or lose our fucking minds. All these things are just blaring in here, That's when it all kind of exploded.
So Tony Margarita tells me, he's the manager of Wilco. He said, oh, hey, next week a film crew's coming in, but don't worry, B-roll, just handheld cameras. You tell them if they're in your way. They won't be in your way. They show up and start laying those railroad tracks, which is awesome. Again, Sam Jones, what a talented guy. The timing was bad. As their production manager, bad timing. Let us finish recording the record, then come in and, maybe we'll fake it and walk through pretend we're recording. We didn't know at the time, but it killed the dynamic.
I never understood critics who called it a fly-on-the-wall documentary. I don't know how any documentary could ever pull that off, but it sure as hell wasn't the case here. A fly on the wall is unnoticed, but we were acutely aware that there were cameras following us around.
All of a sudden, making a cool film became as important as making a record, making our art. But again, it's a phenomenal record. But my opinion, yeah, things changed. Young bands, don't let a film crew come in and film you recording a record. Are you making a movie? Are you trying to look cool to your friends? Or are you bleeding for your art and making a record?
First Glenn Cochi and then Jim O'Rourke coming along, kind of becoming very close to Jeff, not only on an artistic level, but on a personal level. And Jay had that role for a number of years. Basically, since being there, Jay Bennett had been Jeff's closest collaborator, and in some ways is maybe his closest friend. And I don't think he felt that way on either level by the time Yankee Hotel Foxtrot was concluding.
There's just not really room for two towering geniuses in one band, and it just makes for conflict. And the founder is probably going to win in that case.
He felt that Jeff was trying to marginalize him, and that his role was being eclipsed by these two other guys. And, there's two sides to the story. It's petty jealousy, or it's a genuine feeling of being underappreciated. Who's got the right story? Well, I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle.
Now, granted, there was real conflict in the air, and they had different opinions and different views, but both Jay and Jeff changed a little because the film crew was in the room. Again, I don't think Jay was expressing exactly what he meant to say. And then in typical Jay fashion, he wasn't going to back up. He was moving forward.
The band is in the studio trying to figure out the transition from Ashes of American Flags into heavy metal drummer. Jay Bennett and I argue about it. I get annoyed with him. Then he gets annoyed with me. None of this is the revelatory moment. I shoot a look at the camera. It's not something he did or I did or he said or I said. It's never as obvious as you think it should be.
There was animosity and weirdness with Jay and the band. They intentionally made Jay look bad, and things were getting a little weird by then. All of them. You didn't have to go out of your way to make Jay look possessive, like, wait, you gave me the keys to the car. By then it was apparent that we're taking the keys back.
Whatever. Yeah, I don't know what the problem is. I don't.
I just want you to understand me, understand why I was
Why
thinking.
is it so important? I don't have to understand you all the time. It's okay.
That moment being on film, and then also, if you saw it in the movie theater, being literally blown up big on the movie screen, turned that into something that it might not otherwise have been.
And then I remember after I saw the movie talking to Mike Hazelrig, drummer from Titanic Love Affair, and he and I kind of had the same reaction. Went to see it in the theater, watching it, it's tense, the scene is coming up, and then when it happens, Mike said, I just bust out laughing. I'm like, well, that's Jay. I mean, that's how he was with all of us. That was how Jay was.
I thought you wanted it to be the noise going over whatever was really on heavy metal drummer there. See what I'm saying?
I don't want the noise. I don't want the orchestra to go into heavy metal drummer. It cuts right there.
Right. And okay, let me try to explain myself.
Jay could be a frustrating person. We can all be frustrating people at different moments. And Jay was very much a stickler for detail. And I would see this with, his fussing over the particular frequency or the particular setting on a compressor or whatever it might be. So he's bringing that same degree of fussy precision to this moment in, talking about where does the particular tape loop and what's the end and what's the beginning and blah, blah, blah. And I can understand how that might, test someo's patience.
But can I explain myself, please? I didn't know until now that you wanted it to start with a little kit, big kit.
If there had been no cameras rolling when they were having that discussion, he might have still been in Wilco, right? Maybe.
What I hear is Jay saying, I don't need to be right. I just need you to acknowledge that there wasn't something wrong with my thought process.
When you have pieces of footage, how you choose to edit that footage, you can create any story you want to create. And, there were some things that were not in chronological order. Like the Jeff vomiting had happened 2 days before.
There were some shortcuts taken in terms of just presenting material. And so people took from those little sound bites or those little moments in the film, like Jeff and Jay are arguing or they're not agreeing, and then Jeff goes and vomits, and they take, they extrapolate that into, this is what the entire relationship was like, and that's just a very small moment.
All I know is, follow someone around for 3 months, they can make you look any way they want. That's a fact. I could take you in the hour you've been here and take one question of yours and one answer of mine and one response of yours and juggle them all up and then do some fake reaction shots. And all of a sudden you're a dick, but I still get the best line in the movie.
Jeff's on his way down.
Alert the media.
So
What I saw happen was they formed this, kinship, and they really created some great music, and then Jeff wanted to move on from it. And Jay wanted to take it further, I think. I don't think he wanted Yankee Hotel Foxtrot the way it was mixed. That was my impression. And that was the big break.
And I'll never forget the day that Jeff and actually Tony and Margarita pulled me aside and said, hey, we're letting go of Jay Bennett. If he didn't see it coming, it's his own fault. Will you hire a truck and just get all his shit out of the loft, find a new space for him, which was ultimately the Pie Holden Suite Studios on the west side. But when we come back from a long weekend, we want all of his shit gone. So that was pushed into my plate. Thus started my animosity of like, what are you thinking? It's Jay Bennett.
It's about 3 in the morning or something, and I get a phone call, and it is Jay Bennett telling me that he has just been dismissed from Wilco, and he's upset and emotional over the situation.
There were many reasons I didn't want to make music with Jay Bennett anymore. For one thing, it wasn't a healthy situation for either of us.
We sat down and he said, I don't think I can make music with you anymore. And I said, why? And I'm not sure I ever got an answer that made any sense.
He liked the work that he did with them and thought that he, still had more things to contribute to their sound and their success and all of that.
But I think he was really disappointed. From the little snippets he'd reveal, I know that he took a lot of pride in the impact that he had on Wilco, and I think he felt a little bit of pride in how the critics liked Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, and several of the reviews really spoke about his contribution. He was not one to gloat or say, I told you so, but I know that he was proud of that when all that sort of came out in the press. And I think he was just deeply, deeply disappointed that he was a part of something great, had some personal stake in that and a vision of how it could have been even better.
He was pissed. He couldn't believe it. We were all dumbfounded that he didn't already know, or that he couldn't see the writing on the wall, that like, hey, if you don't come back to be part of this entity, rather than a rogue entity doing your own thing, meaning like not slowing down, that, you're working yourself out.
The narrative of I'm trying to break your heart is in part trying to provide cover or show, cause for why Jay Bennett had to go.
It's a movie. You gotta have a hero and a villain.
There was an intention that I don't understand the root of it, but when they were editing the film later, it appears that certain things were left out. And yeah, Jay Bennett was, I don't know why they did this, but they made him look bad. They picked certain footage, I don't know, with Sam Jones, just trying to make Jeff look as good as possible, which always confused me, man. You could have made them both look awesome and artistic in what they really were.
Did they have to put the scene in the movie where they go to the little small club and he's playing for 8 people or something? He was starting over.
Sam also shot footage of Jay and I performing at the Mint to incorporate that into the film as well. I think we're performing My Darlin'. And so the camera is tight up on Jay's face. You hear my voice in the background as well because there's a harmony part going on. But the visual would seem to suggest now Jay's all out by himself and alone, playing shows in small clubs. The place was packed. And then earlier, before we played, Ivan Neville played.
That wasn't necessary to me. That was a low blow. And I think it hurt him. I think it hurt him badly.
I didn't think it was a bad documentary. I just thought that you can do a lot in editing to make a good film. Like you're about to edit this documentary, and you could take anything from anybody's emotional thing and take it out of context. And you could take me looking down at the chair in an emotional moment, trying to remember my friend who's not here anymore, and completely spin it in a dark way. And that's what making good film is about, though, is that turning point somewhere in the film that draws you in. And did I think that it was unfairly edited? Yeah, slightly, because we have a super creative person. And that film didn't even address the fact that the drummer was just kicked out of the band.
I told Sam, I was like, I'm not gonna be in this movie. I have nothing to hide. I'm just telling you what I saw without throwing people deeply under the bus. You're asking me questions, I'm answering them honestly. And he's like, oh, you'll be in it. I wasn't in it. I knew I wasn't gonna be in it. But I got a free trip to LA and sushi, and I like sushi.
If I'm honest, I don't know how long could the Jay throwing the deli meat at the crowd shtick go on? I mean, how long are you gonna do that?
We have to explain the rules of the deli tray game now. Anything that we throw out from this lovely deli tray, provided for us by Irving Plaza, can be thrown back at us. If it didn't come off that fucking deli tray, it can't come back at us, okay?
How long is Jay gonna remain the far more, articulate, educated Bob Stinson of that? How long are you gonna be the genius who's the clown prince as well?
I think that it was inevitable that they went their own ways.
Why?
Because of the strength of their musical talent.
But, whatever. I don't have to tell you that I was hurt. There was hurt and anger and fear. I don't have to tell you that. Of course there was. It's like asking someone, how was your divorce? It's totally cool. It's just totally cool. Yeah, we just talked and said, hey, let's get divorced. And we were like, all right, cool. There's no such thing as a happy divorce. There's such thing as a happier divorce, but, the second it goes down, it's not happy.
When we were trying to express something in Billions, that idea just occurred to us, that a good way to explain a certain kind of relationship and what happens when something goes missing from it would be to talk about Tweedy and Bennett.
Do you like Wilco?
Yeah. Yes, I love the one with Jesus Don't Cry.
Yeah, me too. Because in that one, Jeff Tweedy and Jay Bennett had found in each other a perfect mind meld. They communicated on a level few ever reach.
But I don't think there's any argument to be made that the first None Such record is the record that Wilco will be remembered for.
But the thing about Wilco in that moment is, it was never that good again. Bennett left the group. Somehow, even though each had to know the other made him better, they just couldn't find a way to keep going together.
Did the band break up?
No, even without Bennett, Wilco was Wilco. It kept trucking along.
And Bennett?
He died.
But this is the second in a long line of ex-girlfriend songs.
Bitter, minor key.
About 10 years ago, I had a breakup that I really thank God for, because I got a lot of songs out of it. It redeemed the whole relationship, really. You once already, and feel like losing you again. No matter who you sleep with, I'll still be your friend. 'Cause when the party's in the hotel and you sneak out to the bus, I know you wanna hurt me. It's so you're not gonna believe it, but you gotta believe it. We said, look, I am Jay Bennett. I will never finish a record unless you give me a deadline. I know me. I know me. Give me a goddamn fucking deadline, and I'll make it. Don't give me a deadline, I won't make it. He gave us a deadline. He did the math. The release date came out that day. End of story.
And As we're getting close to put things out, we see the announcement that that is the date that Yankee Hotel Foxtrot will come out. We're like, well, we couldn't have planned that any better, but we didn't actually plan it. It's just that that's how it happened. But because it happened that way, like, well, that's fortunate because, you know, people covering Yankee are probably gonna do a sidebar on us, and it's gonna, you know, generate a little extra press.
I mean, I'm not gonna say that that's not a nice little coincidence, but it is a coincidence.
Jay always joked, hey, I had 2 records come out on the same day. There's probably very few people who have had that. Jay had a bunch of songs in various stages of completion. We started recording songs, and at the time, we weren't thinking of it as that we're recording these to eventually make a record. It was more just something to occupy our time. I've often said that, you know, it was also about the fact that it was cheaper than therapy.
Anytime I had time off from Wilco touring or Wilco recording, I mean, I think Ed and I did more kind of sitting on the porch, you know, learning how to harmonize together and sing together really well than, you know, any other time in my life. It was actually, you know, some of the happiest times of my life were right after I met Ed and found somebody we could just sit there with acoustic guitars and, you know, play old Louvin Brothers songs and harmonize and stuff like that. And we found out that our voices melded together really well.
So we started recording whenever we had the chance. We'd find some time, it was like, oh, okay, we'll work on this song or that song.
So he came in and he brought boxes and boxes of tapes. And literally there would be a song and there would be 4 drum tracks. There would be 4 bass parts. There would be 4 tambourine parts. There'd be 4 of everything. Like he was just obsessive. Like he'd want to cover all his tracks, but it was just like, okay, we're gonna be spending most of our time sifting through this stuff and editing this stuff down. It was too big of a project for me alone, so we had to bring in my business partner at the time, Ken Sluter. And so we had 2 studios working on, you know, dividing the album up because there just wasn't enough time to meet this deadline.
Most reviews tended to like it. I know that there were some who felt that Jay's kitchen sink element was a bit too much. I mean, even for me, looking back at it now, I can buy a little bit of that. I mean, when I listen to that record today, I think if we'd had a little extra time and we would have just, you know, pulled a few other things back to create just a little bit more dynamic movement at certain parts, you know, it would be even better.
I bought this really cool set of Deegan bells, Chicago company. They're basically orchestra bells that you can play with a small keyboard, and it triggers the bells. And it was kind of my new fun toy, so perhaps it got overused.
When you say stop, that was my job on Palace at 4 a.m. I wish I had had a little more power with that because I think 3 or 4 songs could have easily been taken off that record. I think a lot of more of those songs could have been stripped down, but we did what we could. He gave me a lot of leeway, and I think he trusted me, which I really appreciate.
Tell me about Talk to Me.
That's got a good story. I had recorded a relatively lame demo version of it, and due to some digital glitch, it played really fast. There's some sampling rate error, and the version he got was all sped up. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, let me send you a copy where it isn't all sped up. And he's like, no, man, it's cool. So the tempo that you hear it at now is the tempo that Ed first heard it at. And of course, my voice sounded like Mickey Mouse on it.
I can hear the words you whisper in my ear. It's not that I'm really over you. And it gets me down, my love.
By the time we had finished the tour for the first album, I think Jay felt a need to be a bit away from me. And I think it's because during the end portion of those tours, all the usual rock and roll excesses were coming to the fore with the drugs and too much drinking and all that kind of stuff.
It's about 1 o'clock and they go off for an encore, come back on. And Jay's standing at the mic by himself, and he says, "Hey, it's my anniversary." Everybody's like, "Hey, happy anniversary, Jay." And he says, "I think I'm going to call my wife. She's back home in Arlington Heights." And he gets out his cell phone, and you hear, "Hi, honey, I'm on stage in St. Louis. Happy anniversary." And you hear nothing. It's like, "Yeah, yeah." And he's holding the cell phone to the PA, and then you hear click. This despondent look washes over Jay's face. Oh, I think I just fucked up really bad. And I can't remember what song you guys did, but it was something really sad, and Jay was like, his voice is croaking at that point. And I think that was the end of it. And it's still one of the strangest shows I've ever seen. It's really hard to describe the intensity of it. It's just this beautiful mess going on. There was a lot of humor. The Edward and Jay comedy show was at its best that night, but the crowd had no idea what to make of it. The vibe in the crowd was like, what are we seeing? These guys are insane. But they played great. They played really great amidst all this chaos.
I know he went through a period where he was committed to kind of playing everything himself. And so I think, while as great as he was, you lose that spark of collaboration. And I think, some of his greatest works, there was always at least one other person involved. And it was really, I think some of it reflects kind of where his mood was at that time. Things were stark and dark, and the world was not a friendly place. And so I think some of that comes through in those songs.
I think he started leaning on things in his depression that ultimately were going to contribute to the downfall of his health. I mean, let's be honest.
Jay didn't start drinking again until after the film came out, because it had humiliated him so much. So it ended up becoming this self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, this film comes out, portrays you as a fuck-up, and then you're so humiliated that you then end up turning to substances.
I think he was in a really dark place, but he knew it, and he was kind of digging into it. I mean, digging into the dissolution of his marriage.
He was definitely using music as a way to express some very difficult things that he was wrestling with.
In my head it looked like we were dancing. We were hiding our pain in patterns on the floor. We held each other like we were lovers, although we lost that privilege many years before.
The story behind that song is the lyrics were written out on a door, all in one thing, and that door used to be in the studio.
When I was kind of mixing that my band's record with him, we would mix all day, but Jay was very addicted to working on music nonstop. So, and my band was, he was very accommodating. He would just let us crash there or whatever. So, we mixed all day on a "Where the Moon Came From" song. Then the band kind of crashed out, in the corner of this huge warehouse. And then we come into the control room the next morning, and there's all these instruments spread everywhere. And then there's an entire song written on the door. And then Jay wakes up, and he's like, "Oh, this song came to me in the middle of the night, and I just had to work on it." So we just stayed up the rest of the night.
That song has kind of always been there eating at me, and I think one day I was thinking about it and just how beautiful the lyrics are. Like, it's a classic example of just like how, he just tells this story so visually, and so beautifully. And, the other thing that cracked me up about that song, I remember I was like, okay, I'm gonna learn this song, and I started writing out the chords, and the chorus is D, E, A, D. Whether he did it on purpose or not, and I think he did, that's just so Jay to write a murder ballad with the chorus chords being D, E, A, D. It's beautiful.
you were here, you would hear me lie and say I never meant for you to die. When I held you tight that one last time and your salvation became mine, I knew that finally you would feel what I always knew was all too real. We both felt nothing.
The title of the record, The Magnificent Defeat, speaks a little bit to Jay's mindset and to like the mindset of a lot of other musicians that I would put in a similar category to Jay, like Paul Westerberg or, some of these guys who seem to have this thing where they almost know like this would do it, but not quite sure I want it to happen. It's almost like a self-defeating prophecy.
I mean, one of the things I very typically do is the second I write a song, I record it. Yeah, how do you know when a record's done or even when a song is done? I remember actually Jim Scott, who mixed a couple of the Wilco records, gave me the best answer that I've ever heard to this when I get off on it. I think I read an interview once where Prince said this, that if you are trying to decide if a given overdub or instrument should be in a song, you should be able to listen to the whole song with just the lead vocal and that instrument, and it should be satisfying.
Words that weren't written to rhyme. And if I could stop.
The original plan was to release it with there was a sticker on it that said, something like new album from, I think the language was the sonic architect behind, Yankee Foxtrot. And that got into the Warner system, and there were objections.
Songs that weren't finished in time, and words that weren't written to rhyme.
We weren't real close during that dark period, no. And it was, I think Jay kind of pushed away a lot of people, and I don't really want to speculate in too much about what he was feeling. I know there was, it was difficult. He was going through a divorce then at about the same time, and struggling with, wrestling with his own demons. And we would talk periodically, and most of the time he'd seem normal. So I didn't see a lot of the darkness, but I know secondhand there was plenty of it to go around.
For me, he unlocked sort of that idea of the studio as an instrument. This is a dying art. This was the last gasp of people still do this, but putting the mix up, and the mix is there. And when you stop, it's over. Like, you can't just recall that. Even if you take all your notes, you might get pretty close, but it's being in that moment, everybody being at the board, like, okay, you grab those two buttons, and then you're gonna slowly twist this there, right at the right, and you're playing the studio, That's something that I had never really seen or done nearly with that kind of complexity of orchestration and stuff. It was so inspiring.
So we would do the deal where you would go to, in the loft, a big elevator chute and drop a microphone down and put a snare drum in the bottom and hit it, and that kind of stuff we would still do. We would experiment.
Fucking beautiful reverb, and you have so many places like it.
Yeah.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I want to do a gospel record.
We were rehearsing in the kitchen of the studio, and he's like, this is where we need to record it. And so we recorded one of the tracks on the record in the kitchen. I think that Jay definitely influenced us in certain ways when we were working on the next record, certainly in terms of microphone placements, you know, and not being afraid to use the room and like different parts of the room or the building.
When a band has its own studio and you can go, if I hit that radiator with a metal pipe and we slow it down on tape, you know, there's all kind of tricks you can do. That was fun.
Those are some of my favorite kind of instruments. The ones that you hear them and you're like, what the hell is that, you know? And sometimes, to tell you the truth, if it's been a year and a half since I worked on a song, I listen back to a track and I go, well, what the hell is that? You know?
He introduced a lot of toy sounds. Are you aware of that? And I remember one summer he was at our house for about a month, and he and I went out garage sailing, mainly because he was picking up toys. And then he'd pick up the toy and work the sound.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like this little piano, you know, so after he passed away, somebody gave it to me and said, like, yeah, he put that on some records, you know, like anything that would make a noise.
But that era where I really spent a lot of time and hung out and cut my teeth, it was kind of on the west side here. It was very similar to the Wilco loft style, just a very large open warehouse space with a lot of, you know, this gear and a lot of more gear just spread everywhere. So it's like when, you talk about the kitchen was never just the kitchen. That was, maybe the drums got cut in there one, you know, you're talking about 5,000 square feet of recording space. The hallway, the elevator shaft, the bathroom. I mean, it was all acoustic spaces for Jay.
My old studio was set up so that, you know, basically everybody could sleep there and live there. There's a kitchen and everything and some makeshift bedrooms and, air mattresses and stuff like that.
Yeah, so this is one of the studio favorites, an SG that I feel like shows up in live pictures of Jay from time to time. Although he had a couple. One of them was smashed, and I donated that to the Rock Hall, and that was infamously smashed somewhere. But this is just a favorite. He was such an all or nothing person. It was like, cool, we can have this space, but it can be a safe place. It doesn't have to be insane. It can be a creative space that's not excessive and dangerous, you know? And I was invested in that, and we got it to a really cool place. So when he passed away, it was kind of like, well, we've lost Jay, but we don't have to lose this thing that we started, or that he started and I believed in and still believe in, as this creative space that can have a lot of power.
He opened it up to other people. Like there's a whole group of us who we got to grow up playing these guitars because Jay shared them with us. He wasn't just like, I'm not gonna trust these, you know, like these idiots to like go in my studio and play my guitars. Like he got the guitars are meant to be played. They're meant to be shared.
Like I remember playing a Mellotron once with Jay and having it, we were just laying this string part down, and I remember it like catching on fire. The power transformer like just started burning, and there was like smoke and flames, and Jay just started cracking up. I mean, he was like laughing, and we just like kept playing until it just stopped making sound. And it's just hilarious to look back on. I mean, he didn't freak out, and we just like left it record. And I think like maybe in the back of his mind, he was kind of like, I wonder if we're gonna like be able to capture the sound of this Mellotron dying on tape. And like, maybe I've never heard that before.
So this is the recording book that Jay wrote that he always talked about. It's more like writing his thoughts on recording down, most of which are very interesting and relevant. Good instrument, good room, good mic, good pre. Done. Don't overfuck. AB, to AB or not to AB. Breaks in long sessions. Talk about shit other than music. If it makes you cry, it's the take. But let them do one more.
Save opinions, pick your battles.
I believe a lot of his solo music was cathartic. I also believe that in the next few years, it would have been more uplifting. But it was sort of like he needed to get that part of it out of his system.
Here's the difference between, like, yeah, some Wilco era stuff and Jay solo. And this is where, you know, when you want to talk about, oh, was Jay this talent force that people think he was, or was he not? Wilco, you've got, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 players, some of the greatest players in the world. You've got a studio staff, you know, you've got a record producer, you've got a record label, you've got engineers, you've got assistant engineers, you got editors, you got somebody to go get the beer and the cigarettes, you know, you got somebody, you know, making sure a pizza shows up. Jay's solo records, not to say all of them, obviously Ed Birch worked on them a lot, Mike Hegler, who you guys just, you know, spoke with, hung out a lot, but, you know, some of these records we're talking about, it was Jay alone. At wearing every hat, playing every instrument, running all the gear. You know, you're talking about one man wearing a lot of hats and it being some very impressive music.
No, I don't have the time to try to make you mine. It's not that I don't really love you, 'cause I do. It's just that I don't have the time. No, I don't have the patience.
There are two things that come out of, in the media after Jay's death, of the typical, schmuck musician. A, that it was drug-related. B, that he was just some poverty-stricken dude who couldn't even afford health insurance. Neither of which were true.
He was planning to get the hip surgery, and he felt it was going to be, totally life-changing.
Jay had gained some weight, and that his weight was giving him joint problems, and so he was wearing a pain patch.
I don't really love you, 'cause I do, just that I don't have the time.
But at this time, none of us really knew what that patch was that was gonna, it's a patch you put on your body and it shoots medicine into you. It was fentanyl.
Try to make you mine.
The issue was because of, things that he had done over the years with his stage gymnastics and blah, 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 and had previously had some treatment done for an injury. The insurance company saw that as a pre-existing condition. And so they weren't going to cover the hip replacement.
Well, I tried to figure it out, but I'm so full of doubt. And if the pain on this train runs slow, it's still not slow enough for you. Sliding behind blinking eyes of gentle, pillowy stars.
It's just crazy timing. The timing of his death is that a bunch of folks had organized a 20-year music reunion here in Champaign.
And Jay was communicating with us at that time. He was on the page, and he was communicating, but he was being vague about, well, basically, he never said he was gonna play. It wasn't in the plans at all for him to, he wasn't booked.
And so I had to go over borrow some drums from a buddy who actually lived in the same little courtyard as Jay, over in these little villas. It's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm loading drums out of my buddy's place that Thursday, and I see Jay's light on, but I know he'd been in quite a bit of pain because of his hip and stuff. And I was gonna go knock on his door and just say hey, because I hadn't seen him in a month or two. And I was I know he's kind of late. I know he's kind of feeling crappy. I'll see him tomorrow at the party. There's a kickoff party at the bar next door.
The night he passed, we thought he was going to show up and play songs. And it was disappointing when he didn't.
We wanted to see him. We wanted him to come out. And he lived in Urbana. And we were all there.
And then we were going to show up at his house, and he begged us not to.
Another friend of ours, Alex, showed me a text message, this really long text message. He was basically saying like, hey Jay, just giving you a heads up, like people are, you know, it's winding down here, like people are full of beer and like it's getting to like, you know, torches and pitchforks mode. Like people are like wanting to kind of march on your house and come make you hang out with us. And with this really long message to Alex saying, hey, look man, I'm really in a lot of pain from my hip. I just need to get a good night's sleep. Just please, please, please don't come over here. Respect my wishes. I'll see you all tomorrow at the show.
And then we were like, all right, we've got to get Jay to come out. We knew he was still looking at the page because we saw him like, I don't know if we were liking things or whatever it was. So we're like, let's make a sign and we'll post it on the page and he'll see it. So that's why we did it. So we went to Walgreens from our hotel and bought markers, we bought poster boards, and we made it. So we held it up and we put it on the page and we were hoping he would see it. But he had already died. John Gerard called us. I think it was like 1 in the afternoon, something like that, and told us.
Yeah, that was hard. I remember the morning I heard that. I was in disbelief, you know. You never want to hear about a friend dying. It signals your own mortality, and then you start thinking about their family, and man, you know, how does that affect his family? And, you know, my heart went out deeply to Jay's family.
We got out of church, and I usually left my cell phone in the car. Usually after church, when we got into the car, there would be a message from Jay just saying, you know, you're probably in church, but I wanted you to know we're having a good day, or, you know, a brief message, or I'm going to call Dad later because, you know, I need to check on some electrical problem or something at the house. We got in the car and there was a message, but it was from Kate's mom. So that's how we found out.
But I hadn't really processed it until I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And they have a bunch of guitars on display there, and I came around the corner and there was his, and it really hit me then to see his instrument in a glass case, and to think that he wouldn't be playing it anymore.
He never wrote Web in Front. He never recorded Web in Front. He never recorded, you know, flashes and cables, you know. Like he wanted his songs to be as good as that, or maybe he wanted them better. I think, quite frankly, his songs were, you know, the songs that he worked on. But yeah, I feel like even if he had lived to be 90, he probably would have had that his whole life. And that was probably why he was such a genius.
He was a brilliant man, you know, a brilliant artist. And I think he had a lot to say in terms of music, you know, in terms of poetry. It's just a real shame that he wasn't able to stick around longer. I think he could have influenced, you know, another generation of musicians, songwriters, thinkers. Yeah.
From you with your eyes bigger than blue, but you've got me on your side. You've got me on your side. So take 5 minutes and kick off the dust. If only I had listened, I wouldn't have missed that much.
On a personal level, what I miss is the random phone call. once in a while, that smile inside when the cell phone would say it was Jay. And I didn't know what was coming, but it was always some random question, hey, do you remember from physics class, does the distance that I put the microphone from the speaker, should that be different with the wavelength of the sound that I want to emphasize? And I could just imagine him with a yellow legal pad kind of sketching out a formula from high school physics and wanting to make sure that he got it right. But again, that was that curiosity and tinkering, and that's, to the end, that's something we had in common.
Had we gotten news of his death 2 or 3 years before, the people may not have been as surprised. When we got news of his death in May of 2009, it was definitely a shock because everybody who had interaction with him at that time and saw how he was doing in his life, I mean, aside from the fact that he was in pain from the hip issue, his head was in a better spot than it had been in years.
The beginning of his life was very happy, and I was very happy that the end of his life was so happy. I mean, and I'm not saying that he had horrible times in between, but ups and downs like everybody did. And I didn't want him to die, but I was glad that he died at probably the happiest time of his life.
I know that when he passed away, not only did we have the material for Kicking at the Perfumed Air, there's 60 or 70, maybe 100 other songs at some degree of preparation. There's hundreds of sheets of paper and pizza boxes and sheets of cardboard with lyrics written on them in a Sharpie, and doors and bits of music and sound, and the day that he put together PVC pipe and duct tape to make a drum set and just to see what kind of sound he could get out of it. Crazy experimentation that survives and may never be heard again. But I think he was in a place where he was enjoying life. He wasn't, he was moving forward. He was not dwelling on the past. And he was doing what he always wanted to do, which was just making the music better.
That first beer, that second beer, the third beer is the best. I love beer more than the rest. That fourth beer, that fifth beer, that sixth beer still tastes fine. Bring me more beer. You can keep the wine. You say I drank too much. You say I think too much. You say I laugh too much when things are really serious. You say I live too hard. You say I've gone too far. I think I'll crash my car, then I'll become a star overnight.
Sort of take like every Hollywood movie where there's a really smart guy. Maybe there's a MacGyver type guy, or the guys from Apollo 13 who figured out how to fix a spaceship, and then mix in some Brian Wilson who hears everything in his head and wants to coax those sounds and will put a mic on anything. And then throw in a little bit of, I don't know, the Three Stooges, mix in just a little bit of kind of sadness. I mean, what I saw in Jay was, I think, a lot of what drove him was he wanted to be the best, and he wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted people to like him, and he wanted people to respect him. He wanted to do something a little different, a little better, a little cooler, a little, whatever. And he wanted you to understand him, why he was doing it.
You say I've gone too far. You say I live too hard. I think I'll crash right here, 'cause I've had too much beer for one night.
It's audience participation time. Do you want me to do a guitar solo or not? Totally up to you. That was kind of tepid, so I'm thinking I'm not going to do one.
You know the funniest thing about Jay? This has nothing to do with anything. When you live on the road with somebody, you find out who they are. He had the smallest feet of any man I've ever been around. And he thought I was like Bozo the Clown. I wear 14, so I have large feet. He wore a 7. And I would take those little shoes off. He always had those black, what were they, like work shoes? I'm sure he got them at a thrift store like he and I did everything. But I'd look at those shoes and I was like, man, these are 7s. And you look normal. Why are your feet so small, man? Used to blow my mind. And he would just say, I just have small feet. I was like, wow. I wonder if his dad had small feet, his family had small. That has nothing to do with anything, by the way.
All the elements of style and all the elements of grace, but no evidence of cheating anywhere on your face. But it can't tame the hunger and you can't quench the thirst, the lies or the lying. You don't know which came first. Songs that weren't finished in time.